Very good, thank you, Kulapriya. Yeah, on the train here, I knew that Kulapriya would be introducing me, and I was reminiscing about our time in the valley in Spain. So Kulapriya and I didn't know each other at all before we agreed to spend 4 months together in a hut. Yeah, it was. I think so. There's two things that really stood out for me at that time. So one was Kulapriya's such sort of steady, warm gentleness, sort of throughout, almost, with hardly any blips. It's just this very sort of steady warmth and gentleness. And then also his favorite pastime in the valley, which was sitting just outside of our hut and looking out at the valley, which he'd spend maybe 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day, after breakfast and then after lunch, and it was just a sort of model of contentment. It wasn't like he was snoozing; he was just taking in this scene, this sort of mountainous valley scene. So yeah, really delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. So actually, when I was reminiscing about this, one of the things I was struck by was quite how vivid the memories were of that time. I know I spent 4 months there, and it was quite a special time for me as well. But it wasn't just like I had a sort of idea, or the words of Kulapriya sitting in his foldable camping chair, looking out at the valley. It's like, the colours were there, the blue sky, the sort of grey, the silvery grey of the mountains, the smell of the pine leaves. The warmth of the sun against my skin, all of these kinds of things were coming back to me as I was reminiscing, or just like sitting on the King's Cross train into Cambridge. And this is the sort of the start of what I want to talk about in terms of mind. Mind, meta. One of the qualities of mind is that it creates worlds. This is a very sort of basic Buddhist teaching. Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. And one way of looking at that is that mind creates the worlds that we inhabit. Whether that is a memory, in the sense of sort of returning to a previous world of experience. It's all there. All of the senses are there in germinal form. But it has other implications. So another example of this might be something like it's Halloween today. That may have escaped you, I don't know, but it's Halloween, and perhaps some of you after this evening will be going to a Halloween party, maybe. Maybe not, or maybe you'll be going through town on your way home and encounter Halloween parties or sort of Halloween party goers. I'm not sure what the Cambridge nightlife's like, but I'm sure there will be some people celebrating this evening in fancy dress and probably all kinds of other accoutrements. And it might be that you come out of the Cambridge Buddhist Centre on a Tuesday night and encounter this sort of thing, and you think, yeah, I love this energy, this this sort of this revelry, the kind of spirit of celebration, of partying, of music, of sound, etc. You might think, fantastic, I've had a good night in the Buddhist Centre, and now I can party into the early hours dressed like a pumpkin or whatever it might be. Or it might be that you think, that sounds like a bit much. A bit more like, I'm a bit more sensitive, and it's quite loud, and they seem to have got really carried away, and there's emergency vehicles, and there's things on the street that probably I don't want to tread in, and sort of. Okay, so it's potentially the same situation. The same situation will confront you as you leave. Well, maybe if you go into the centre of Cambridge, it will confront you of Halloween revelry, and it might be that you're drawn to that, or it might be you're slightly sort of receding from it or retreating from it. Well, again, this is the mind creating a certain world. It's it's that within well, because mind precedes experience, the mind we bring to a particular objective situation will highlight some aspects of that situation and push others into the background. You know, it might be the energy and the excitement comes to the foreground. It might be it's the sort of sense of mild or moderate threat comes to the foreground. But that's coming from the mind. It's not a feature of the objective situation per se. It's the mind that highlights some aspects rather than others. And this, yeah, I mean, we can take this more and more deeply, actually, and the Buddhist tradition does take this more and more deeply. Like when you start to examine what this relationship is between the, as it were, subjective or mind created bit and this so-called objective and external bit, it starts to get a bit weird. Yeah, so it's not quite as clear cut as one might imagine, and in fact, mind is instrumental in probably a lot more than we tend to imagine it is. But what I'm particularly interested in, and I noticed Kulapri has taken away his book now, which I signed earlier. But anyway, I'll hold it up because it's good publicity, and Windhorse, my publishers, really like me doing this. So, you know, so in my book, which is called Cyberloka, I draw on this. So the word Cyberloka is not just it's not just a clever title, or it's not attempting to be just a clever title. It is the way that I see our relationship with digital technology. So I'll break it down. So the word cyber, I probably don't need to explain. I'm using that to mean, you know, anything kind of digital tech related. But then this word loka is getting more at this sense of a mind-created world of experience. So in the course of, well, this situation that we are in, 2023, and has been happening ongoingly probably for the last 30, 40 or more years, the human mind has been coming into relationship with digital technology. And in that relation, it creates a world. And depending on the mind that we bring to that interaction, certain things will show up to us more than others. It might be that it's the, you know, the compelling news stories that show up loudly to us. It might be it's our sense of feeling left out or missing something because we're not immediately able to respond to something on social media or whatever. You know, fill in the gaps. You all have experience of this to some extent. Even those people who don't use WhatsApp, yeah, if you use email, you have got some experience of this and of these technologies. And it's a world, and so this is the sort of philosophical backdrop to the book. The book itself is quite a bit more practical and personal. This evening, I want to talk mainly about sort of the view that I'm bringing to it, and the view I think actually a Buddhist would bring to it. That's the main thing I'm trying to offer here is a Buddhist guide to digital life, or a Buddhist perspective on this. There's plenty of commentators on the digital realm, coming from all sorts of different angles: neuroscience, psychology, politics, all sorts of different perspectives. But what interests me, and what I hope will interest you, is what this sort of feature of mind creation brings to our interactions with digital technology. And I offer this particularly because I'm aware that there is a counter model of mind which is prevailing in the discussions we have around digital tech, and that model goes something like this. The mind is software running on the brain, which is the hardware. Basically, the mind is a computer, and not a very good one, because it got its last update in the Paleolithic, and compared with these warehouses full of machine learning, algorithmic supercomputers. Basically, we don't have a hope. Yeah. So this is a view which you encounter on things like, I don't know if some of you have encountered The Social Dilemma, which is a sort of Netflix documentary. That's basically the view behind it, is that the mind is a not very good computer, and that in the face of these very sophisticated machines, which are better computers than us, and like even my mum's 50-year-old pocket calculator is a better computer than I am. Yeah. So if we see mind as a not very good computer, that inculcates in us a kind of fatalism. It inculcates in us a view that actually we are just at the mercy of these computers. We're at the mercy of big tech, of these corporations, and well, where do you go from there, really? Where do you go from there? So I'm proposing an alternative model of mind. Well, I'm not proposing it. The Buddha proposes it, and I'm echoing it, just to be clear. But it stands in distinction with, even in contradiction with, this other more fatalistic view of mind. And really, my offering to you is like, there's a choice. We have a choice here. We have a choice about the view of mind that we take, and therefore the consequences that has for distraction, setting up good habits, etc. All the sort of things that you find on 5 top tips for managing your digital life on the internet, which I'm not going to go into because they're there, someone else has done it. But the view is important. All right, so that's a bit I wanted to say about mind. So if we recognize, or if we acknowledge that mind creates world, or is a substantial factor in creating our world, well, what kind of world do we want to create? What kind of mind do we want to bring to that interaction, and therefore bring into being, or the world that we bring into being through that? And this, one of the great things about Buddhism is there are so many positive qualities that we can draw on to say what the answer to that is. Whether it's a world of faith, or of beauty, or of awareness. The one I want to home in on particularly today is metta, and not just because there's a bit of a pun with the new name of Facebook. The thing I want to particularly home in on with metta is the way it's sometimes described in early Buddhist texts. So it's described as a Brahma Vihara, which is sometimes translated as something like a sublime abode, or a divine abiding. And I like to experiment with taking that literally. So sometimes, we might think of the metta bhavana, the practice of developing loving kindness, as a sort of psychological way of addressing our relationships with other people, and that's great. That works. Yeah, it does. I notice it in my own life, for the great fortune of the people around me. But this idea that with metta, actually, we are creating like an abode, or we're sort of creating and inhabiting an abode which has divine or sublime qualities, is something I find attractive, I find appealing. As if there's something atmospheric in the development of metta, which goes beyond merely the sort of psychological patternings that I have internally. I mean, you know this because you've come to a Buddhist center and you will experience that. I imagine most of you have experienced it to some extent. You come into this place and you are around people who are cultivating metta, and there's an atmosphere. Hopefully I don't need to kind of dwell on that too much, but it's an atmosphere, which has beauty, which has sensitivity, which has awareness. And it's also an atmosphere, this is the thing I really like as well, it's an atmosphere in which we become less separate. Yeah, so one of the features of the sort of the elevated and more refined kind of atmosphere is that the sort of hard sense of me in here and you out there is attenuated. it becomes thinner. It becomes more, less sort of hard and fast, less separate. Hopefully you've got some experience of that as well, at least through having come here or in your practice of metta bhavana. Anyway, so I'm going to tell a little story. I'm a bit, I don't know. Let's see how this story goes. See how it lands, because it's a bit wacky. It's a bit wacky. So in the block of flats I live in Oxford, we have an underground garage, or sort of semi-subterranean garage, and the door to this garage is one of these ones that sort of is sprung, and it comes up and goes vroom like that, and then sort of lingers a bit, goes vroom like that. Except it hasn't for about 8 months. And in fact, before that, for a couple of years, it was really hard to get it closed. And then when you opened it, it would just, almost rather dangerously spring up. But in the last few months, it's probably certainly the last 6 months, it's just been in a permanently open position, which has been a source of great ire in the building, because a lot of the people's my neighbour's car insurance depends on it being closed, and gosh, the number of times it's been attempted to be fixed, or it's been promised that it would be fixed, or then it's been fixed and then it's rapidly broken, or actually we need to get in a whole new door, but the door is too low for some of the vehicles that are parked in there, and so pipework needs to be moved, and so it kind of goes on. It's one of these really mundane situations of a broken garage door, and nothing really has happened in the last few months at all with it. So I had the idea on Friday. So this is why it's quite a new story, and I haven't quite reflected fully on this. But I had the idea: why don't I go down and do a bit of metta bhavana for the garage, right? And anyway, so I went down there and I did a little bit of chanting. I recited some verses. I lit some incense, just as a little offering for the garage. And I was wandering around the inside of this garage with this incense. And it was late on a Friday night. There was no one around. So I made sure there was no one around. I've got a weird enough reputation in my building anyway. And I was doing this, and I felt a really strong sense of sadness. So I was just walking around, and it's like, oh gosh, so I started slightly welling up. And I reflected on it a bit later, and I realised I've actually maligned this garage in the past. It floods. It has a tendency to flood. Its parking spaces were designed for cars in the 1970s. So they're too small, and there are weird pillars and things. So I've expressed this, and it's just this sense of sadness around this, doing metta bhavana for the garage. Anyway, I left my incense sort of smouldering away, and and I stayed with some of the sense of sadness, brought metta to that, extended the metta back again to the garage, and then went off and had a shower and went to bed. Anyway, the next working day, I received an email saying they're going to fix the garage door. Now, I don't know what to make of that. Yeah, a correlation. There's certainly a correlation. Coincidence, probably. But what was I going to say? And certainly in terms of causation, it's I'm not holding too much. It's saying too much store by the causation. But the thing I noticed was, in the course of doing that, I felt so much more connected to my garage. And I really like. It was interesting. We were doing this gratitude bhavana earlier. Like the fact that I can leave my stuff in this garage, and at least before the door was broken, it was safe, and it provides this service for us. I was like, I've not done that before. I've really thought about that before. So it's particular. I don't know how that lands with you. That's a bit of a weird story, but anyway, it's part of my attempting to connect more with an animistic aspect of Buddhist practice. But that's another book. But this sense of a sense of less and less separation that comes through metta is something which doesn't just hold for underground garages. It doesn't just hold for people. It holds for like all beings. And this is so essential, you know, when it comes to our online interactions, so essential, because, you know, they're particularly when discussions get heated or they enter into sort of weighty territory. And, you know, I've seen some WhatsApp groups go a bit awry in the last few weeks, let's say. And what do? You get a thumbnail. Yeah, you get a thumbnail of someone and they're posing on holiday with their baby or their mocktail or whatever it is. Like, and it's this really sort of small pixelated thing, and it's saying things that you don't want them to say. It's saying things that you'd really rather, well, they're wrong. How dare they say these things? They're wrong, and they wish they didn't say them. And because it's only this thumbnail, it's not even that, you know, it's minuscule, a bit of information that we have about this person. We've got so little to go on that it's so easy then to project all kinds of nasty stuff onto these people. And I think it's a fascinating and really quite like challenging practice to bring metta into that situation and recognize that actually, I'm not so different from this person. I don't know what's going on for them. Maybe this, and this, and this, and this might be going on for them. Yeah, the sort of loosening of the separation between myself and this person who isn't a thumbnail, who's got a whole life going on behind that thumbnail, enables me to inhabit an imaginative space in which I can see more of them, or I can see the possibilities of more of them. And anyway, it's you know, I've been reflecting on this material for quite a while now, and that is just feels like such an essential sort of consequence of seeing the way that mind creates the world, mind creates world. That if I bring this attitude of metta to this situation, possibilities open up in there which I would not have seen before. Possibilities for interaction, maybe in that space, maybe in the kind of face-to-face environment as well. But it's an expansive space that I enter into when I'm bringing, well, when my mind is imbued with metta, and therefore the Cyberloka I inhabit is imbued with metta as well. I mean, hopefully that shouldn't be, well, that's in a way obvious, and yet sometimes it can be a bit not so obvious when it comes to digital technology. You know, we do these practices and we sort of imagine, okay, that's what I do on the cushion or in the Buddhist center, or it was appropriate in, you know, ancient India, but there you go. It's got a clear application, a really clear application in the aspect of social media. Well, I'm going to wrap up in a minute, so I'll just say the last thing I want to say, which is to do with how we create spaces. So this last thing I was talking about with, say, WhatsApp and these thumbnails posting objectionable things, that's already assuming that there's a space been set up by somebody else. Yeah, so somebody else created that WhatsApp group. But what fascinates me is the potential for creating spaces which from the outset are imbued with the quality of metta, which are, you know, based on this idea that mind creates world and that world can be metaphor. What might that look like? Yeah, that's the sort of open question that I'm exploring. And as a little soundbite, one of the things I've been saying is I think it involves moving from a paradigm of posting to one of hosting. Yeah, so this is probably familiar. Like the sort of standard verb we use when we talk about social media is posting. You know, and I imagine that comes from this idea of there's a sort of town square somewhere in a semi-public environment, and we just like nail our views to a post and hope that other people will read it and probably be educated as a result, ideally. But it's hardly communication. It's communication at best in the most minimal sense of the word. You know, maybe they'll post something in the public space for us to then read and digest and so on. But, you know, my experience of this I was just thinking when I was a student, and there was this little whiteboard that appeared in one of my shared houses that I lived in the kitchen, which just became like it was only a little one, like A4 whiteboard. It became this vessel for passive aggressive, you know, unpleasant communication between housemates. It's not a way to conduct communication, to do it like that. So I'm interested in this idea of hosting, not just because it rhymes with posting and therefore is better and true, but because that's what we do in situations like this. You know, in situations in Buddhist centers, in study groups, in so many different ways. Actually, Buddhists are fantastic at hosting spaces. You know, fantastic at creating worlds within which this separation between self and other can become attenuated. It can thin, in which we're able to discuss things that really matter to us, and in which together actually we can rise above whatever the differences are that we come along with, because there are going to be differences. Somehow through this understanding that mind creates world, and that a world created by metta is a world in which we can transcend difference. Like that serves as a basis for, I think, what can happen not just in sort of in-person situations, but even online. And I've certainly got quite a few ideas about what that looks like. But that's the trajectory I'm charting, at least in the background. I don't go into very much of this at all in Cyberloka, but that's the background view. Mind creates world, metta creates better worlds. And what that looks like in our digital interactions are, I think, principally a kind of hosting mentality rather than a posting mentality. So, thank you for listening. Yeah.